Rachel Hartman is my big sister. And her head is full of crazy stuff. As a kid, I always knew this. She would come up with the wackiest things, various things for us to pretend and to play. And I really enjoyed reading the stuff that she wrote. One of my favorites, when I was in middle school and she was in high school, she wrote a parody of Romeo and Juliet called Romiette and Julio. And it involved cross-dressing and gender bending and all kinds of crazy stuff. And it made me laugh. And one of my favorite characteristics of my sister is that she always does make me laugh. But as I've been observing her as she wrote this book and in the process of writing the next one and working with the publishing world, there are a couple of things about her that I observed that I didn't quite see clearly when I was a kid. One thing that I've learned more recently about Rachel is that she is radically hospitable to new ideas. And that's the kind of thing that I hope that we also cultivate here at Augustana. My sister is, as I said, full of really crazy ideas. But she doesn't just dismiss them. As she puts it, she invites them over for tea and sees whether she likes them. And I think that is a really admirable quality, and it's one that I hope to emulate in my own work also, is being willing to welcome new ideas and see where they go. Her openness to new ideas, I think, has helped her as a writer because it's helped her revise all the times that she needed to revise. And that's the other quality that my sister, I'm sure she always had, but I didn't really see it when we were kids, and that is persistence and this sort of grit, the willingness to stick to something and keep working at it. My sister worked on this first book for 9 years, and she had to rewrite it, 4 times, 5 times? Yeah, with an entirely new plot each time. I'm serious. Yeah, so that's a heck of a lot of work. I'm surprised she didn't give up. I would have given up after probably 3 times. I would have said, okay, this is a signal that I'm not meant to do this work or something like that. She did not interpret it that way. Maybe she's stubborn. But whatever it is, it's a quality that has served her well. That through all of this, she has found a way to be hospitable to new ideas of revision and to work with it and keep working to create the wonderful works that she has created. I love her book, Seraphina, and I hope those of you who have read it, hope you love it too. As she'll probably mention, there's another one coming out in about a year, and I'm very excited. I'm sure I'm going to love that one just as much too. Part of what I think about when I think about these books is I think about the way that my sister's mind is full of variety and interestingness, but also full of hospitality. She brings into these books things that people writing in this genre sometimes don't deal with. She brings in religion, she brings in different sexualities, she brings in politics, she brings in race, she brings in all of these elements that are challenging for any of us to think about or talk about. But she creates a world in which we can examine ourselves. I love reading fantasy, but I swore off fantasy in high school. There was a moment I had this little awakening where I said to myself, I can't do this anymore. And the reason I couldn't is because I was retreating from the real world into fantasy. I could tell. I was trying to get away from the real world and into a different world. When I picked up my sister's book, I thought, oh dear, I'm gonna get sucked in again. I'm gonna turn my back on the real world. But that didn't happen. Now maybe it's because I'm different, but I like to think it's because her book is so great. That it didn't lead me to turn my back on the real world. It led me to want to engage with the real world. It inspired me to think more deeply about things like truth and things like inclusion and some of these other important themes. So I know I've gone on for too long, so I'm about to stop. Mostly I want to say that I am completely and thoroughly delighted to welcome Rachel Hartman, who is an award-winning author, a best-selling author, and my big sister. I had no idea I was that awesome. Thank you, Laura. That was really sweet. Golly, I didn't know she was that sweet, frankly. But you know, we do grow up. We change. We grow. I have some. I don't know how many of you have read the book. I'm going to proceed as if none of you have read the book and pretend that this is all new, because it will be new coming from my voice, perhaps. Seraphina is the story
of a girl growing up in a world where dragons can take human form. Now, that may not seem like such a big deal off the top of your head, but if you think about it, if dragons can take human form, the person sitting next to you right now might be a dragon. What about your religious studies professor? What about your mom? You know, as soon as I came up with this idea, and I came up with it well before I even started writing Seraphina, I came up with it back in my comic book days when I was green in judgment. And it opened this whole box of ideas for me. And I found that is often the case, that a what-if question leads to another what-if question leads to another what-if question. And that, for me, really, Laura was talking about fantasy as escape. For me, fantasy is digging deep. Fantasy is experimenting with ideas, possibilities. You build this whole world and then you run people through the maze and see what happens. And it's such good fun, such good fun. So I will read to you a few of my favorite parts of this book. I was originally, sorry, the microphone and I are having a difficult relationship here. I was originally going to read you chapter 2. Well, the 2 classes that I spoke to today, I learned that they read the first 3 chapters, so much for that great idea. Instead, I'm going to start with you with a place in chapter 5. This is one of my favorite parts. People who know me well know that I have this thing about cockroaches. When we lived in Chicago, we were in this horrible roach-infested apartment, and I had never lived near cockroaches before, and I was quite put off by them. But I did what I always do in times of stress. I went to the library, and I found as many books on cockroaches as I could, and there were exactly 2. But they were scientific texts, right? This was the Regenstein Library at the University of Chicago. So they were scientific texts, and I learned about cockroaches. And it turns out, if you cut the head off one, it can live for a week until it dies of thirst. This is true, it will still scuttle horribly. Anyway, there's lots of things to know. But ever since that time, I've had this odd obsession with the critters, right? I'm not scared of them anymore, I'm interested. So, there is in Seraphina an extended metaphor about cockroaches, where Seraphina, who has become the assistant music mistress of the palace, is trying to explain to the princess at her harpsichord lesson how dragons see humans. I heard them giggling from out in the corridor. Princess Griselda and whichever lady-in-waiting she dragged along with her this time. It sounded like an age mage from the pitch of the giggle. I wondered briefly what a giggle concerto might sound like. We would need a chorus of, "Is she very, very cranky?" asked the lady-in-waiting. I froze. That question didn't pertain to me, surely. "Behave," cried the princess, her laugh like water. I said prickly, not cranky. I felt my face go hot. Prickly? Was I really? "She's good-hearted anyway," added Princess Griselda, which makes her Viridius's opposite, "and very nearly pretty, only she does have such dreadful taste in gowns, and I can't work out what she thinks she's doing with her hair." "That might be easily corrected," said the lady-in-waiting. I'd heard enough. I stepped through the doorway, fuming, but trying not to confirm my reputation. The lady-in-waiting was half porphyrian, judging by her dark curls and warm brown skin. She put a hand to her mouth, embarrassed at being overheard. Princess Griselda said, "Fina, we were just talking about you." It is a princess's privilege to feel no social awkwardness, ever. She smiled, gloriously unashamed. The sunlight through the windows behind her made a halo of her golden hair. I curtsied and approached the harpsichord. Princess Griselda rose from her window seat and flounced after me. She was 15, a year younger than me, which made me feel odd about teaching her. She was petite for her age, which made me feel like a gawky giantess. She loved pearl-studded brocade and was possessed of more confidence than I could imagine having. "Fina," she chirped, "meet Lady Millifried. She is, like you, encumbered with an unnecessarily long name, so I call her Millie." I nodded acknowledgement to Millie, but held my tongue about the silliness of that comment coming from someone named Griselda. "I have reached a decision," the princess announced. "I shall perform at the Treaty Eve concert, that Galliard in Provana, not Viridius's suite, the one by Tertius." I had been placing music upon the stand. I paused, book in hand, weighing my next words. The arpeggios in the tertius were a challenge, if you recall. Do you imply my skill is insufficient? Griselda lifted her chin dangerously. No, I merely remind you that you called tertius a poxy-cankered toad and threw music across the room. Here both girls burst out laughing. I added as gingerly as one stepping onto an unstable bridge, if you practice and take my advice about the fingerings, you ought to be able to work it up sufficiently well. Sufficiently well not to embarrass yourself, I might have added, but it seemed imprudent to do so. I want to show Viridius that tertius played badly is better than his piddling tunes played well, she said, wagging her finger. Can I attain that level of petty vindictiveness? Undoubtedly, I said, and then wondered whether I should have replied so quickly. Both girls were laughing again, however, so I took it I was safe. Griselda seated herself on the bench, stretched her elegant fingers, and launched into the tertius. Viridius had once proclaimed her as musical as a boiled cabbage, loudly, and in front of the entire court. But I had found her diligent and interested when treated respectfully. We hammered at those arpeggios for more than an hour. Her hands were small. This wouldn't be easy, but she neither complained nor flagged. My stomach ended the lesson by growling. Trust my very body to be rude. We should let your poor teacher go to lunch, said Millie. Was that your stomach? Said the princess brightly. I'd have sworn there was a dragon in the room. St. Argo preserve us, lest she decide to crunch our bones. I ran a tongue over my teeth, delaying until I could speak without scolding. I know deriding dragons is something of a national sport for us Goredis, but Ardmager Commandant is coming soon, and I do not think he'd be amused by that kind of talk. Saints dogs. I was prickly, even when I tried not to be. She hadn't been exaggerating. Dragons are never amused by anything, said Griselda, arching an eyebrow. But she's right, said Millie. Rudeness is rudeness, even if unperceived. Griselda rolled her eyes. You know what Lady Corney would say. We must show them we're superior and put them in their place. Dominate or be dominated. Dragons know no other way. That sounded to me like an extremely dangerous way to interact with dragons. I hesitated, uncertain whether it would be within bounds for me to correct Lady Corongi, Griselda's governess, who outranked me in every possible way. Why do you think they finally surrendered? Griselda said. It's because they recognized our superiority, militarily, intellectually, morally. That's what Lady Corongi says? I said, alarmed, but struggling not to show it. That's what everybody says, sniffed Griselda. It's obvious. Dragons envy us. That's why they take our shape whenever they can. I gaped at her. Blue Saint proved Griselda was going to be queen someday. She needed to understand the truth of things. We didn't defeat them, whatever you've been told. Our Dracomachia gave us approximate parity. They couldn't win without taking unacceptable losses. It's not a surrender so much as a truce. Griselda wrinkled her nose. You imply that we haven't dominated them at all. We haven't, fortunately, I said, rising and trying to cover my agitation by rearranging the music on the stand. They wouldn't stand for it. They bide their time till we let our guard down. Griselda looked profoundly disturbed. But if we're weaker than they are, I leaned against the harpsichord. It's not about strength or weakness, princess. Why do you imagine our peoples fought for so long? Griselda put her hands together as if delivering a little sermon. Dragons hate us because we are just and favored by the saints. Evil always seeks to destroy the good that stands against it. No! I nearly smacked the harpsichord lid, but recalled myself in time, slowing my hand and tapping twice. Nevertheless, the girls stared at me round-eyed in anticipation of my astonishing opinions. I tried to moderate that with a gentle tone. The dragons wanted these lands back. Goreb, Ninus, and Samson used to be their hunting ground. Big game ran here. Elk, oryx, feldeer, in herds stretching to the horizon before our kind moved in and plowed it under. That was a very long time ago. Surely they can't still miss it, said Griselda shrewdly. It would be unwise to make assumptions about her intelligence based on her cherubic face, I noted. Her gaze was as sharp as her cousin Lucian's. Our people migrated here 2,000 years ago, I said. That's 10 dragon generations. The herds have been extinct for about 1,000, and the dragons do indeed feel loss. They're confined to the mountains where their population dwindles. They can't hunt the northern plains, asked the princess. They can and do, but the northern plains are only a third the size of the United Southlands, and they're not empty either. Dragons compete with barbarian tribes for diminishing herds. They can't just be barbarians, said Griselda. I disliked her supercilious tone, but could not say so. I traced the decorative inlay on the instrument lid, channeling my irritation into curlicues, and said, we humans aren't good eating, too stringy, and we're no fun to hunt because we band together and fight back. My teacher once heard dragon compare us to cockroaches. Millie wrinkled her nose, but Griselda looked at me quizzically. Apparently she'd never even seen a cockroach. I let Millie explain. Her description elicited a shriek from the princess, who demanded, "In what manner do we resemble such vermin?" Take it from a dragon's perspective. We're everywhere. We can hide easily, we reproduce comparatively quickly, and we spoil their hunting, and we smell bad. The girls scowled. "We do not either smell bad," said Millie. "To them we do." This analogy was proving apt, so I took it to its logical conclusion. Imagine you've got a terrible infestation. What do? "Kill them!" cried both girls together. "But," I said, "what if the roaches were intelligent and worked together, using a roachly drachamachia against us? What if they had a real chance of winning?" Griselda squirmed with horror, but Millie said, "Make a truce with them. Let them have certain houses to themselves if they leave the ones we're living in alone." "We wouldn't mean it, though," said the princess grimly, drumming her fingers on top of the harpsichord. "We'd pretend to make peace, then set their houses on fire." I laughed. She'd surprised me. "Remind me not to earn your enmity, princess. But if the cockroaches were dominating us, we wouldn't give in? We'd trick them?" "Absolutely." "All right. Can you think of anything at all, that the cockroaches would do to persuade us that we should let them live?" The girls exchanged a skeptical look. "Cockroaches can only scuttle horribly and spoil your food," said Millie, hugging herself. She had experience, I gathered. Griselda, however, was thinking hard, the tip of her tongue protruding from her mouth. "What if they held court, or built cathedrals, or wrote poetry? Would you let them live?" I asked. "I might. How ugly are they, though, really?" I grinned. "Too late. You've noticed they're interesting. You understand them when they talk. What if you could become one for short periods of time?" They writhed with laughter. I felt they'd understood, but I underscored my point. Our survival depends not on being superior, but on being sufficiently interesting. "Tell me," said Griselda, borrowing Millie's embroidered handkerchief to wipe her eyes, "how does a mere assistant music mistress know so much about dragons?" I met her gaze, clamping down with a tremor in my voice. "My father's the crown's legal expert on Commandant's Treaty. He used to read it to me as a bedtime story." That didn't adequately explain my knowledge, I realized, but the girls found the idea so hilarious that they questioned me no further. I smiled along with them, but felt the pain for my poor, sad papa. He'd been so desperate to understand where he stood, legally or unwittingly marrying a dragon. As the saying went, he was neck deep in St. Vitt's spit. We both were. I curtsied and took my leave quickly, lest this heavenly saliva somehow become apparent to the girls. My own survival required me to counterbalance interest with invisible. So you may have noticed a little detail at the end there, that Miss Seraphina's mother was a dragon. That is one of the hazards, alas, of dragons taking human form. Now technically, in the land of Breath, it is illegal, this sort of confraternization. However, my mother didn't tell. That makes things more complicated. That actually was one of the very first inklings of an idea that I had for this book. When I was a wee young thing of 30, my parents got divorced. And it was a difficult time for me. I mean, I realize many people in this room have been through it maybe more than once. But I was 30 and it hadn't happened to me yet, right? And so it required a lot of adjustment. And during all this processing of the grief that went on, this question kept coming to my mind. What if you married someone with a terrible secret and didn't realize what it was until they were dead? That is not my parents' situation precisely. It fits more if you think of me as the living spouse and the divorce is the secret, the fact that they weren't getting along, that was the secret, that was the death, right? But the subconscious works in funny ways. Anyway, this question kept coming through. And I had already invented this world where dragons can take human form in my comics. And it just seemed to me like that was the logical thing to be the secret. The mother would be a dragon and the club wouldn't know. And how hard that would be to then have this child to take care of. And all these unanswered questions. One of the fun things to write in this book, in fact, were scenes about Seraphina's mother. Seraphina has what's called maternal memories. Because her mother was a dragon, this is something dragons can do in this world. They leave memories to their children. It's helpful. It helps the children know who to trust and They know their language when they're hatched. There's all kinds of reasons for this on the dragon side. Her mother is able to leave Seraphina's memories in what's called a mind pearl. It's like a little capsule waiting to go off in her mind. In the course of this book, something happens to trigger these mind pearls, and she begins having these memories uncontrollably at times that are very inconvenient. But writing those was really fun because it meant I could write from the dragon's perspective for a little while. And what would it be like to be living in a body that was alien to you, with emotions that were alien to you, feelings that you didn't quite understand. And so this is one of my favorite memories of those that I wrote. So, right. And they're in present tense, so they feel different from the rest of the book. So the voice is really clearly different. My hands dart over the page, a slender brush in each, one for the dots, one for the strokes and arcs, winding in and around each other as if I were making bobbin lace, not writing music. The effect is calligraphic and highly satisfying. Outside my open window, a lark sings, and my left hand, always the more mischievous of the two, takes a moment to jot down the notes and counterpoint to the main melody, but with a little alteration of the rhythm. That is serendipitous. So many things are when we bother to look. I know his tread, know it like my own pulse. Better, perhaps, because my pulse has been doing unaccountable things recently in response to that footfall. Right now it beats 7 against his 3. That's too fast. Dr. Karamis was unconcerned when I told him. He did not believe me when I said I did not understand it. I'm on my feet, not knowing how, almost before the knock sounds at my door. My hands are inky, and my voice unreliable as I cry, "Come in!" Claude lets himself in, his face that shade of sulky that it turns when he's trying not to get his hopes up. I snatch up a rag to wipe my hands and cover my confusion. Is this funny or frightening? I had no idea the two could be so close. I heard you wanted to see me, he mumbles. Yes, I'm sorry. I should have answered your letters. I've had to think very carefully on this. On whether you'd help me write these songs, he says, and there's something childish in his voice, petulant, which is irritating on the one hand and endearing on the other. He is transparently simple, this one, and unexpectedly complicated, and radiantly beautiful. I hand him the page and watch his face soften into wonder. My hands go straight to my chest as if they could squeeze my heart and slow it. He hands the song back to me and his voice quavers, "Would you sing it?" I would rather play it for him on the flute, but he clearly wishes to hear the words in tune together. My faith should not come easily. There is no heaven without pain. My days should never flutter past unnoted, nor my past remain beyond its span of usefulness. Let me not hold to grief. My hope, my light, my saint is love. In love, my one belief. He stares at me during the last lines, and I fear my voice will falter. As it is, I've barely enough breath left in me for grief. I inhale, but the air seems to catch on its way in, like a shudder of breath after tears. This emotion is maddening in its complexity. It's like spotting difficult prey on the ground after a long day of fruitless hunting. There's the exhilaration of an exciting chase mixed with the fear that it may all end in nothing. But there's never any question that you'll try, or your very existence hangs on it. I'm reminded also of the first time I dove from a sea cliff, keeping my wings folded until the last possible second, then scudding over the cresting waves, just out of reach of their foamy fingers, laughing at the danger, terrified by how close I had come. I'm so glad you're here, I say. I understand now that I made you very sad. That was never my intention. Claude rubs the back of his neck and wrinkles his nose, about to tell me that he was never sad. I believe this is called bravado, and it is not limited to lawyers or even men, although that combination makes it almost unavoidable. Normally I could shrug at this, but today I need him to be truthful. Today is the beginning and the end. I reach across and take his hand. That jolt we both feel, for I see it hit him too, is like electricity. But that is a metaphor I will never be able to give him, a concept that cannot be introduced. One of far too many, alas, but I am hoping, no, gambling, betting my very life, that in the end it will not matter, that this thing between us, this mystery will be enough. Lynn, he says hoarsely, his jaw quivering just a little. He's frightened too. Why should this be frightening? What purpose does that serve? Lynn, he begins again, when I believed you never wanted to see me again, I felt I'd stepped off a ledge into empty air. The ground was hurtling toward me at an alarming rate. Metaphor is awkward, but emotion by its nature leaves you no more scalable approach. I have not adequately mastered the art, but his comparisons always move me with their precision. I want to cry Eureka, but I settle for, I felt that too. That's it exactly. My other hand wants to touch his face, and I let it. He leans into it like a cat. And that is when I know that I will kiss him, and the very thought of it fills me with, well, it's as if I have just solved Skivers' predictive equations, or even better, as if I have intuited the one equation, seen the numbers behind the moon and stars, behind mountains and history, art and death and yearning, as if my comprehension is large enough that it can encompass universes from the beginning to the end of time. And I have to laugh a little at this conceit, because I do not even understand the present, and there is nothing in the world beyond this kiss. That's... Oh, okay. That was fun to write too. Let's see, oh, we're doing very well. All right. Here is a slightly longer passage, maybe. I was talking to one of the classes today about the order things happen. The order everything is in the book is not the order it occurred to me, necessarily. And there was a specific part of the book that came to me very late, sort of through a chance question of my editors. He just asked in the margin somewhere, why are people still so scared of dragons after 40 years if they don't see them on a regular basis? Right? I mean, maybe they're among you, okay, but why are people still scared? Everyone who's growing up has grown up without dragons in the sky. And I suddenly realized, oh, well, there is another species of dragon. And I was sort of saving it for, I don't know what, the future? I don't know. This always happens when you save stuff up, you know, and then suddenly you realize, wait, what am I saving it for? There's always more. So I said, okay, yes, because the reason people are still freaked out by dragons is because there is in fact a second species of dragon in town. And these dragons cannot change their shape. And they don't quite look like dragons even. They look a bit like iguanas, large iguanas. They don't have wings, their dorsal wings have turned into long skinny arms. So they've got two sets of arms. And they eat garbage, and they have terrible breath, and they squeeze into cracks, and they're yucky. Okay, how about that? And then he's like, well, okay, but where are they? I said, they're in the dragon part of town, duh. In this scene, Seraphina needs to meet with her uncle, Orma, who's a dragon. Orma is concerned that his father, the dragon Imlan, might be around and might be a rogue dragon. So he has asked Seraphina to talk to the prince. I'm just giving you a little background because every scene is so full of stuff, you know? Let me look at this. However, Orma has been given an assignment. He has to babysit another dragon, who is what they call a new skin. He's a dragon who has just learned to take human shape, and he's not very good at it yet. His name is Bassend. Dragons in their human form are called Sartras. That's a word for a dragon in human form. Sometimes it gets shortened to Sar, just sort of meaning dragon. What else? Okay, there's Joseph and Lars are two other characters who are not getting along. You just sort of hear about them. There's the memory box. You'll hear that. That's what her solution to all these memories. She has stuffed them in a box in her mind. So the memory box is mentioned as well. And I think that's about it. So she's waiting for Orma. He's asked her to wait for him at a restaurant called the Mallet and Mullet. That's a great name for a restaurant. Somebody should open that restaurant. All right. The warmth of the Mallet and Mullet was welcome, although I never felt quite comfortable in the presence of strangers with smoke, chatter, and clatter. The fire and lamps provided too little light. It took me some time, scanning tables, to realize Orma had not yet arrived. I claimed a place near the hearth, ordered myself some barley water, to the barmaid's scornful amusement, and sat down to wait. It wasn't like Orma to be late. I sipped my beverage, keeping my eyes to myself, until commotion by the door grew too loud to ignore. "You can't bring his kind in here," snarled the tapmaster, who had come out from behind the bar, dragging a muscular cook with him as backup. I turned around to look. Orma stood in the foyer, unfastening his cloak clasp. Bassend lurked behind him, his bell tinkling plaintively. Patrons near the door made St. Augus's sign or pressed fragrant sachets to their noses as if warding off disease. The tapmaster folded his arms over his dingy apron. This is a respectable establishment. We've served the likes of Baronet Meadowburn and Countess de Paraday. Recently? Said Orma, widening his eyes mildly. The tapmaster took that for disrespect and puffed out his chest. The cook fingered the edge of his cleaver. I was already on my feet, slapping a coin on the table. Go back outside. The open night air when I reached it came as a relief, even if Basson's slouching silhouette did not. Why did you bring him along? I said crossly as we stepped into the empty street. You should have known they wouldn't serve him. Orma opened his mouth, but Basson spoke first. Where my teacher goes, I go. Orma shrugged. There are places we could eat. Places, maybe, but only in one part of town. Quighole was closed after sunset, technically. Only 2 streets led into what had once been St. Gilbertus Close. Each had been fitted with tall wrought iron gate that the Queen's Guard, with great ceremony, padlocked every evening. Of course, the buildings facing the square had back doors, so one had simply to walk through a shop, tavern, or a house full of quiggiles, those are the second species of dragon, to get in and out, and there was always the tunnels down below. Disgruntled Sauertraut characterized Quighole as a prison. It was a porous prison, if so. Old St. Gilbertus's had once been a church when the parish outgrew the building. New St. Gilbertus's had been built across the river where there was more space. After Commandant's treaty, some dragons had aspired to run a little collegium to help fill Commandant's proposed interspecies knowledge exchange. Old St. Gilbertus's was the largest unused building they could find. While bell-exempt dragon students such as Orma sneaked around studying our mysterious ways, other scholars, fully belled and graduated, came to St. Bart's, as it was now called, to teach their sciences to backward humans. They got few students, and fewer who would admit to being students. St. Bart's trained the best physicians, but few humans wanted a doctor practicing spooky SAR medicine on them. A recent scandal over the dissection of human cadavers hadn't helped matters. Riots all over town had nearly turned into a bloodbath. People demanded vengeance against the Sauertraut and their students who dared paw through human remains. There had been a trial, with my father right in the middle of things as usual. Dissection was forbidden and several dragons were sent back to the Tanimir, but physicians continued to train in secret. I had only been to Quighole once, when Orma took me with her to fetch my itch ointment. It was not a place respectable young girls should be seen, and my father had been adamant that I should avoid the neighborhood. As many of his objections as I had overturned or disregarded, I had willingly abided by this one. Orma took us up an alley and reached over the top of a gate to unlock it and led us into someone's muddy kitchen garden. Dead marrow vines swished underfoot. A pig grunted in one enclosure. Another was full of rotting vegetables. I feared the house's owner would come after us with a pitchfork at any minute, but Orma walked straight up to the door and knocked 3 times. No one answered. He knocked 3 more times and then scratched the flaking paint with his nails. A little hatch window opened. Who is it? Asked a scratchy voice. It's Polecat, said Orma. I've come to nix the mink. An old woman with wide, toothless grin opened the door to us. I followed Orma down the stairs into a fetid semi-darkness. We arrived in a humid, stenchy cellar lit by wide hearths, small lamps, and a hanging light fixture in the shape of a mermaid with antlers. Her bosom bare to all the world, brandishing 2 candles like swords. Her eyes bugged out at me as if she were astonished to see a sister monster. My eyes adjusted. We were in some sort of underground public house. There were rickety tables and a variety of patrons, human, Sauertraut, and Quighole. Humans and Sauertraut sat at the same tables here, students engaged in deep discussion with teachers. Here was a Sar demonstrating principles of surface tension, just as Zayd had taught me before her special tutorial in gravity, by holding a glass of water upside down with only a slip of parchment between his rapt students and a drenching. In another corner I saw an impromptu dissection of a small mammal, or dinner, or both. No one came to Quighole who didn't have to. I had more personal dealings with Sauertraut than most people, and I'd only been there once. I had never seen both my peoples together like this. I found myself a little overcome. The human students did not interact much with the Quighole, but it was still remarkable how little fussed they were at the presence of the creatures. Nobody sent back food that had been touched by quigs. There were quig servers, and nobody shrieked upon discovering one under the table. Quighole had affixed themselves to the rafters and the walls, some clustered round tables with Sauertraut. The global stench undoubtedly came from quig breath, but the nose falls asleep quickly. By the time we found a table, I barely smelled anything at all. Orma went to order us dinner, leaving me with Basant. Our table was covered in chalk equations. I pretended to look at them while studying the new skin sidelong. He gaped vapidly at a nearby table full of quigs. I couldn't talk to Orma in front of Basant. but I didn't see how to get around it. I followed Bassen's gaze to the next table and gasped. The Quigs there had their tongues out and sparks were flying. It was hard to see through the gloom, but they appeared to be altering the shape of a bottle, melting the glass with focused heat from their tongues and pulling it like taffy. The long fingers of their dorsal arms, the twig-like dexterous limbs they had in place of wings, seemed impervious to heat. They pulled the glass as thin as thread, heated it again, and looped it around into lacy structures. Orma returned and set down our drinks. He followed my gaze to the glass spinning quiggle. They'd made a hollow basket-sized egg of green glass threads. Why don't glass blowers hire them, I asked. Why don't goldsmiths hire them, said Orma, passing Bassent a cup of barley water. They don't follow instructions willingly, for one thing. How is it that you Sar don't understand art, I said, marveling at their gleaming creation. Quigs make art. That's not art, said Orma flatly. How would you even know? His eyebrows drew together. They don't value it the way a human would. There's no meaning to it. One of the Quigs had climbed under the table and was attempting to sit on the glass egg. It shattered into 1,000 shards. See, said Orma. I thought about the human-faced lizard in my purse. I wasn't sure he was right. That figurine spoke to me somehow. The tapmaster came rushing toward the Quigs, brandishing a broom and shouting. The Quigs scattered, some under the table, some up the walls. Clean this up, the man said. You can't come in here if you're going to jump around like apes. The Quigs all lisped insults at him, but they crept back and cleaned the table, using sticky fingers of their ventral hands to pick up the splintered glass. They collected it in their mouths, masticated it, and spit molten globs, hissing, into a glass of beer. There was a glass of beer at our table, too, belonging to Orma. Bassent had honed in on it and was leaning over the cup, sniffing. He rose with a drip on the end of his nose. That's an intoxicant. I should report you. Recall Clause 9 of the exemption papers, said Orma coolly. A scholar working incognito may bend standard protocols 22 and 27, or such other protocols as he deems necessary for the successful maintenance of his disguise. That's the one. Bassent continued. Clause 9a said scholar will file Form 89XQ for each of his deviations and may be required to undergo a psychological audit and or defend the necessity of his actions before the Board of Censors. Enough, Bassent, said Orma. As the patron saints of comedy would have it, however, a quiggle brought our dinner at that very moment. Lamb oleo for me, leek and turnip soup for Bassent, and for my uncle, a fat boiled sausage. Tell me, must you file a separate form for each item individually, or can you lump together the sausage and beer consumed in the same meal? Asked Bassent with surprising acuity. Separate forms when I'm overdue for an audit, said Orma. He took a drink. You can help me fill them out later. Esker says rules have reasons, rasped Bassent. I must wear clothing so as not to frighten people. I mustn't spread butter on my itchy skin because it offends my landlady. Similarly, we may not eat the flesh of animals because it makes us hunger for the abundant flesh around the table. Bassent flashed his horrid buggy eyes toward me. That's the idea, yes, said Orma, but I've never found it to be the case, particularly with sausages, where the meat barely resembles meat at all. Bassent looked around the dim basement at the other Sarentine and muttered, I should report this whole room. Orma ignored this. He drew a small handful of coins out of the hidden recesses of his doublet, lowered his hand to his lap, and jingled the coins. Suddenly there were Quigs on the floor, all around us, crawling under the table, winding around our ankles like snakes. This was a bit much even for me. Orma broadcast the coins into the tangle on the floor, as if he were feeding chickens. The Quigs scrambled for the coins, went still a moment, and then swarmed Bassent. No, I don't, said Bassent confusedly. Leave me alone. I gaped at him, not recognizing the opportunity Orma had created, till my uncle grabbed my arm, pulled me away from the table, and whispered, I know Quig hand signals. I told them Bassent has a hoard at home. If you have news, I want it now. There's that. It was super fun for me making up those quiggles and their abilities, because they've got this sort of tube-like tongue, you know, that can have a little open flame at the end so they can weld with it, and they get good fun. It's another reason for writing fantasy, friend. You just come up with something like that, you're just like, yes, we! So, all right, I'm giving you my time here. I have brought a special thing, which is the prologue to the next book, Shatterscale, which I will finish writing by next Monday. That's my deadline. And it will be out next spring. Unless, you know, barring disaster, right? I really feel like my history, right? I just really need to knock on something here. You never know. But that's the intention as of now. All right, this is the prologue. And the prologue, I should just tell you, it's not too spoilery, all right? So people who have read the first book will know the characters, and they'll even know what's going on. Those of you who haven't read it, in the first book, one of the qualities Seraphina has is by being a half-dragon, is that her mind has been reaching out to other half-dragons. Well, she didn't really know what they were. She didn't understand why she was having visions of these people. And so, in order to stop her mind from doing this, because it was very inconvenient, she was passing out in the middle of the street, it was bad, she created a garden in her mind as a place for them all to live. And she visits it every night and tends it. And this prevents these visions. Well, the prologue is about the creation of that. So, all right. I returned to myself. I rubbed my eyes, forgetting that the left was bruised, and the pain snapped the world into focus. I was sitting on the splintery wooden floor of Uncle Orma's office, deep in the library of St. Ida's Music Conservatory. Books piled around me like a nest of knowledge. A face, looming above me, resolved into Orma's beaky nose, black eyes, spectacles, and beard. His expressions showed more curiosity than concern. I was 11 years old. Orma had been teaching me meditation for months. I'd never been so deep inside my head before, nor felt so disoriented emerging from it. He thrust a mug of water under my nose. I grasped it shakily and drank. I wasn't thirsty, but any trace of kindness in my dragon uncle was the thing to encourage. "Report, Seraphina," he said, straightening himself and pushing up his spectacles. His voice held neither warmth nor impatience. Orma crossed the room in 2 strides and sat upon his desk, not bothering to clear the books off first. I shifted on the hard floor. A cushion, welcomer than water, would have required more empathy than a dragon, even in human form, could muster. "It worked," I said, in a voice like an elderly frog's. I gulped water and tried again. "I imagined a grove of fruit trees and pictured the little Porphyrian boy among them." Orma tented his long fingers in front of his gray doublet and stared at me. "And were you able to induce a true vision of him?" "Yes." I took his hands in mine, and then it was difficult to describe the next bit, a sickening swirl as if my consciousness was being sucked down a drain. I was too weary to explain. "I saw him in Porphyry. He was playing near a temple, chasing a puppy." "No headache or nausea?" interrupted Orma, whose draconic heart could not be plugged with puppies. I shook my head to make sure. "None." "You exited the vision at will?" He might have been checking off a list. "I did." "You seized the vision rather than it seizing you?" "Check." "Did you give a name to the boy's symbolic representation in your head, the avatar?" I felt the color rise to my cheeks, which was silly. Orma was incapable of laughing at me. "I named him Fruit Bat." Orma nodded gravely, as if this were the most solemn and fitting name ever devised. "What did you name the rest?" We stared at each other. Somewhere in the library, outside Orma's office, a librarian monk was whistling off-key. Was I supposed to have done the rest? I said, "Shouldn't we give it some time? If Fruit Bat stays in his special garden and doesn't plague me with visions, we'll be certain." "How did you get that black eye?" Orma said, his gaze hawkish. I pursed my lips. He knew perfectly well. I'd been overtaken by a vision during yesterday's music lesson, fallen out of my chair, and slammed my face against the corner of his desk. "At least I hadn't smashed my ood," he'd said at the time. "It's only a matter of time before a vision fells you on the street and you're run over by a carriage," Orma said, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. "You don't have the luxury of time, unless you plan to stay in bed for the foreseeable future." I carefully set the mug on the floor, away from his books. "I don't like inviting them all into my head at once," I said. "Some of the beings I see are quite horrifying. It's awful that they invade my mind without asking, but you misunderstand the mechanism," said Orma mildly. "If these grotesques were invading your consciousness, our other meditation strategies would have kept them out. Your mind is responsible. It reaches out compulsively. The avatars you create in your head will be real, permanent connection to these beings, so your mind won't have to lunge out clumsily anymore. If you want to see them, you need only reach inward." I couldn't imagine wanting to visit any of these grotesques, ever. Suddenly it all seemed too much to bear. I'd started with my favorite, friendliest woman, and that had exhausted me. My eyes blurred again. I wiped the good one on my sleeve, ashamed to be leaking tears in front of my dragon uncle. He watched me, his head cocked like a bird. "You're not helpless, Seraphina. You are Why is helpful not the antonym of helpless? He seemed so genuinely befuddled by this question that I laughed in spite of myself. But how do I proceed? I said. Fruit bat was obvious. He's always climbing trees. That dread swamp slug can loll in mud, I suppose, and I'll put the wild man in a cave, but the rest? What kind of garden do I build to contain them? Orma scratched his false beard. It often seemed to irritate him. He said, do you know what's wrong with your religion? I blinked at him, trying to parse the non sequitur. There's no proper creation myth, he said. Your saints appeared 600-700 years ago and kicked out the pagans, who had a perfectly serviceable myth involving the sun and a female aurochs, I might add. But for some reason, your saints didn't bother with an origin story. He cleaned his spectacles on the hem of his doublet. Do you know the Porphyrian creation story? I stared at him pointedly. My tutor woefully neglects Porphyrian theology. He was my tutor these days. Orma ignored the jibe. It's tolerably short. The twin gods, necessity and chance, walked among the stars. What needed to be, was, and what might be, sometimes was. I waited for the rest, but that seemed to be it. I like that myth, he said. It corresponds to the laws of nature, except for the part where there are gods. I frowned, trying to understand why he was telling me this. Is that how you think I ought to create the rest of the garden? I hazarded, walk through my mind like a god? It's not blasphemy, he said, replacing his spectacles and peering owlishly at me. It's a metaphor, like everything else you're building in your mind. It is permissible to be the god of your own metaphors. Gods aren't helpless, I said, with more bravado than I felt. Seraphina isn't helpless, said Orma sullenly. This garden will be your bulwark. It will keep you safe. I wish I could believe that, I said, my voice frog-like again. It would probably help if you did. The human brain's capacity for belief produces interesting neurochemical effects in the... I ignored the lecture, adjusted my posture, set my knees akimbo with my hands upon them. Closing my eyes, I made each breath successively deeper and slower, and descended again into my other world. Do we have any questions? Everyone's shy. Up, yes?
So where does Laura show up in your book?
That is a really interesting question.
Princess Griselda.
She's made that claim.
She has. But you know, I think, yeah, because at first she seems kind of ditzy, but then
She's smarter than she looks.
right, which has always been the case with you. We said that hadn't true. Okay, no, in fact, it's interesting. Seraphina does have two younger sisters who show up extremely briefly. And then that's it. That's all there is for sisters. I really didn't deal with sisters in this book. I have lots of things to say about sisters. I'm not going to get to the point where, that's the problem I'm dealing with. Actually, the next book is Shadow Scale. But the book after that is already an inkling in my mind. And I think I am going to write a book about one of Seraphina's sisters. And it will deal more with sisters because she is one of twins. And that will just of necessity be a bigger part of her daily life. Also though, her dealing with Seraphina, who will have achieved this sort of level of fame, how do you deal with that? I'm sorry. We had so much fun. We were such fun sisters. We were very close sisters.
We had a good time.
Yep. So there you go.
We really did.
We always just love seeing each other. I know, right? So, okay, I should not just talk to her the whole time. Who else has a question? Yeah, what do you have?
So Seraphina is not the only half-dragon in the book, right?
Right, but she slowly discovers that, and that is a little spoiler, and I'm sorry, but you guys can handle it, right?
So,
Yeah.
do many of the half-dragons have like something physical where people can identify them as being half-dragon? Or
They
is it only
do,
some
but it's
places?
some are more subtle than others.
Okay.
Some are very obvious. One of the things I enjoyed kind of playing with was the idea that since dragons and humans aren't really meant to interbreed, that it manifests differently for each one. And I thought that was fun. Until I got to the second book and I had to do this for all of them. I was like, what? Why couldn't there just be like 5? And then, so I set myself a large task. Which I find. I had to call on my inner Dickens. I don't know if anyone reads Dickens anymore, but Charles Dickens had a singular and amazing talent, I think, for capturing a character, encapsulating them in just a few sentences. You knew exactly. Some people call it caricaturing. Fine. taken to extreme, it kind of is, but it can be. But still, the ability to really get a character in a short amount of space so they're distinguishable from all the other characters, that is a skill I sort of tried to cultivate with the second book, and I think I did all right. Do we have more? Yes?
How did you come up with the names of the places, like the names of the dragons in human form, like all those terms?
Well, they came from a variety of places. I studied classical Greek for 4 years in college and never did anything with it. So some of it's drawing from Greek. Lasarantas is very loosely lizard man in Greek, right? Very loosely. You have to kind of squint, but it's there. Other things though, what I tried to do, because I can't make things, this equals this neural or this, I don't like that sort of system, but you try and get a feeling. And so there's a country called Ninnis, for example, which I try to have it have a feeling of the Romance language parts of Europe. Okay? There's another country called Samsung, and I try to make it have a feeling of sort of the Germanic parts. Porphyry was an interesting mixture of things. It's based on Greece and Rome and other Mediterranean cultures, but it was inspired originally by some reading I did on the Swahili-speaking cultures up and down the coast of Africa. But what I realized that even way back then, and this is sort of a common idea now, the idea of appropriation, and that writing about cultures that aren't yours and how you use them, and even back then, before that was really a term that was thrown around a lot, I felt instinctively that I was never going to know enough about the Swahili cultures to do them justice, or to not have it be this total white girl ripoff. So what I said was, okay, what cultures that I know of, that I feel are more in the public debate, what cultures are similar? And I thought, well, okay, the seafaring trading peoples of the Mediterranean, who were also from the empires, and I knew all about them. So I kept the Porphyrians black, sort of as a tribute to my heart, to my original idea of where they came from. But I kind of turned it more toward Greece and Rome and classical antiquity, because I felt like that was in the public domain more. I have since learned, interestingly enough, that in fact Greek people don't necessarily feel like their culture in ancient times is in the public domain, and they feel like they have been told by the rest of Europe how to revere their own culture. There's so many issues everyone has, and we just do our best, right? And I studied Greece for 4 years, and I love Greece, and so this is the Greece of my heart. Is how I would do it. So I don't know, does that sort of answer your question? Some of it does. Some of it. All right. Do you have more questions? Yes.
So there's a lot of themes like self-actualization and inclusion and things in your book, and I was wondering if you came up with those first and then took it that way, or if you wrote the story and those themes kind of developed through the story.
The latter more. I think the way I look at writing is that themes are things that are going to be bubbling up no matter what you do. You don't have to conscientiously put them in there. They're going to bubble up. And in fact, they're better when they kind of bubble up organically, and your subconscious lets them come up. Now, you don't let your subconscious do all the heavy lifting. But the first draft, you let it all bubble up, and then you notice, and then you can kind of shape it. But that yes, I used to joke that on forums, they say, "What's your occupation?" You ought to have another slot say, "What's your preoccupation?" That's actually more interesting, and it's something that comes out whether you want it to or not. And so, yeah, for me, the themes grew. That the real starting place were these kind of what-if questions, and that usually is for me the starting place. What if this, and then it leads to another question. I dig deeper that direction. Plot is a whole other kettle of fish, and I had to learn to do that, sort of as a separate skill. I grew up not believing in plot, and got informed. But you know what? It's fun. It was a challenge. It was like a challenge that my editor set to me. He said, "Look, you're good at this kind of introspective, quiet, personal novel." Because for me, that is true. The real story the interesting story is always internal. That for me is the meat of everything. But he was like, can you have this meaningful internal story while also having the big world-spanning overarching plot. Can you do that, Rachel? And I have this problem where people challenge me to do stuff and I'm like, "Arr, yeah, let's see." So it was a good challenge, and I feel like in the end I did pull it off, and I'm actually really proud of all that. So, are there more questions? Yes? You guys, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.